Hello, it's Philip Taylor from Richmond Green Chambers speaking, and I'm looking at a book today for YouTube which is Prisoners, Law and Practice. It's written by two people. It's Creighton and Hamish Arnott. It's published by the Legal Action Group, and this is the book here. Quite heavy, about 800 pages. Standard setup of the book, information right at the beginning, cases and statutes, some useful paragraph numbers at the sides, because this is actually a paperback, but the paragraph numbers are very helpful to locate what you're interested in. We've also got useful appendices, short ones at the back, and then a very detailed index which is extremely helpful and very clear. My wife and I have been through this book and we've looked at it. It's very much in keeping with the Legal Action Group stable of publications, very much an operational work as a sort of handbook for advisors, and in keeping with what they produce. This is what we've said about it. We've given the title, Do You Advise Prisoners and Their Families? If so, this book is essential reading for advisors, and we say that if you're called upon from time to time in a professional capacity to advise prisoners and their families, it's worth having a read of this book. You may or may not feel the same way about prisons or prisoners afterwards, of course, but many barristers actually routinely interview prisoners in cells as part of their work, and perhaps you may never have been inside a prison yourself, and have absolutely no inclination of doing so, but this is the sort of work which will give you some idea what the law is relating to prisoners at the moment. It's one of the latest of the advisor publications from the estimable LAG, and who continue, in our view, admirably in their quest to compile, write and publish meticulously researched works of reference, mainly for professional advisors, or those of our professional fellow human beings who, quite frankly, are desperate, obviously from the homeless to the unemployed to asylum seekers and certainly to prisoners. So they cover a wide range of advice to these groups of people. People who find themselves categorized, of course, within these groups are vulnerable by definition. So attracting varying degrees of sympathy and disdain from the public, their human rights are all too often overlooked or compromised. They, like anybody else, require the protection of the law, and they depend on the will, of course, of others to uphold and sustain it. Stephen Shaw, who's the prison's ombudsman, points out that without law in the case of prisoners, the ever-present danger of neglect or abuse may go unchecked. The subtitle, Law and Practice, he adds, is well judged, and he's right about that. So Prisoners' Law and Practice is what we would describe as an accessible and practical guide to the law governing prisons. It takes the reader logically along the path of a prisoner through the custodial process, from reception at prison to categorization and allocation and related issues, to prison conditions and rights whilst in detention, and the various mechanisms for release. There's also a strong focus on prisoners' rights and remedies, and a critical analysis of the duties of the state towards those in detention. Relevant domestic and international case law, legislation, policies and guidance are also fully covered, obviously both at the front and by reference if you look at the index. However, Shaw also observes the book is much more than just a guide to the present state of prison law. It's a work of advocacy, and there is at the heart of the text what he calls an intrinsic belief in the right of prisoners to be treated fairly, respectfully, and in a manner that recognises their inherent vulnerability. Now, to those of you who argue that victims have rights and are even more vulnerable, the authors claim that this is a false dichotomy, and that there is, or should not be, any conflict between prisoners' rights and those of their victims. With a little quote saying, between the two groups, the issues of openness and accountability are at the heart of the concerns of both victims and prisoners. As with all attacks on vulnerable members of society, the erosion of the rights of prisoners should stand as a stark forewarning of the general erosion of wider rights in society. And to conclude, we've therefore come up with the view that this is actually a distinguished and comprehensive work of reference. It's new for LAG, and it's very useful for advisors in this area. It's got 12 chapters, about 800 pages, so it's quite a heavy book, and it's aimed to reflect the law as it was on the 30th of April 2009, with a prison population at record levels. It's clearly a book for the current times, and thank you very much LAG for producing it. I'm sure it's an additional welcome for those firms involved in this activity. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.